Доброго дня ще раз.
Hi to everyone again. So, dear colleagues who participate in the welcoming part, please join.
Доброго дня ще раз всім.
Hi again to everyone. And before we start our agenda, I would like to suggest to honor with a minute of silence for all those who gave their lives because of their aggression.
Прошу сідати.
Please take your seats. Thank you. Before we start, just a few organizational issues. So if there is an air raid alert, we have a shelter located on the -1st floor. It's marked with all the plates. Today we have very active agenda and so many different speakers. That's why we kindly ask everyone to stick to the schedule and our agenda. It will allow us to have a fruitful and very active discussion, and for everyone to have a floor. And to open our discussion, I'm happy to give a floor to Viktor Pavlushchyk, Head of the National Agency on Corruption Prevention. Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm happy to welcome all of you here in the NACP premises at a very important event on this very important topic for us. That's one of the aspects of future work of a major part of state authorities, of course, is connected to the recovery of Ukraine. This topic is on the plate of and all the platforms. It's one of the key tracks on implementation of such events as EURC, the Ukrainian Recovery Conference, which took place 2 weeks ago in Rome. And of course, in this situation, I'm happy that the national agency has an opportunity to contribute to this process. And of course, for us, it's important that to have transparent legislation, because that's one of the crucial elements of corruption prevention in Ukraine. And transparent legislation and no corruption risks in the recovery sector is the most efficient means to prevent corruption. We will keep underlining that prevention is more effective than prosecution of corruption cases. We need to create all conditions for integrity to prevail among practices and public service, for it to become a foundation for this work. And there should be no place for corruption practices at all there. And also, I would like to mention that same as before having Ukrainian Recovery Conference, I had an opportunity to be included into the delegation on approval of the Ukrainian report upon results of the 5th round of the Istanbul OECD action plan. And based on the results of this report, which is going to be presented at the end of September, Ukraine has shown quite high results in the prevention and combating corruption. And one of the sectors is anti-corruption policy, where Ukraine received more than 90 points out of 100 possible points. And that's why it's very important to remember about risk assessments and possibility to identify risks and mitigate those risks in the future. From the side of the NACP, when last year relevant organizational changes took place and powers were delegated to the specific unit which deals with this matter. This unit includes carrying out strategical analysis of anti-corruption risks and also anti-corruption expertise of legal acts which are being prepared by state authorities of Ukraine. And these are important functions of the NACP. which envisage timely identification of those gaps that shall be mitigated by state authorities in future, either during their functioning or on the stage of preparation of legal acts. And as a result of those organizational changes, specialists who work in this directorate with involvement of Basel Institute of Governance have carried out a comprehensive strategical analysis of corruption risks in the area of reconstruction, capital repairs of civil objects for recovery of Ukraine. I would be happy to give a floor to my colleagues, colleagues from NACP and colleagues of the Basel Institute. They will present this study. It has been done together with other state authorities, and for us it's also important factor that those state authorities were involved, and so it means that they also have owned this process, and I'm sure that in cooperation with other state authorities, such work, such analysis will bring very good, fruitful results in a short time period. To wrap up, I would like to express my words of appreciation to our partners, Basel Institute of Governance, thanks to whom this event is possible, thanks to whom we can use their expertise, also going beyond the limits of the national agency. And I would like to say thank you for this event that we are having today. So thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you, Viktor, for welcoming words, for opening this event, for directing us, and I'm happy to give a floor for welcoming words to participants, to the head of the Parliamentary Committee on Organization of State Power, Local Self-Governance, Regional Development and Urban Planning, Olena Shuliak. Hi to everyone. First of all, thank you so much, and words of appreciation and honor to NACP and all the partners for giving us an opportunity to have such studies to be performed. Viktor mentioned that here we have only the most prevailing risks to be presented in this presentation, but I'm sure that if we are going to cover all the risks, we will have so many different piles of documents, because we have so many different gaps and risks that should be mitigated, should be prevented, not only in the legislation sector, but also everywhere in terms of price development, in terms of building code and other things. I would like to start with the following. In this study, one of the key risks is mentioned that as of now, despite of the fact that we have been already on the 4th year of the full-scale invasion, but first now we're still missing comprehensive legislation framework which will tell us who is going to recover Ukraine and what shall be done in terms of recovery. Even more to say, the term recovery is not envisaged on the legislative level yet. So last year, under the auspices of the Ministry of Territories and Communities Development, the huge expert group has been established with involvement of many stakeholders to develop a draft law which would be called on the key basics of the recovery. But this working group is not functioning yet as of now, even despite of the fact that the draft law exists, but the work doesn't go. So I would like to reach out to the Serhii Derkach, to the Deputy Minister, kindly asking to renew, to activize this work, because yes, indeed, it's so crucial to have such comprehensive legislative framework in the recovery sector. It also mentioned by the Office of the Business Ombudsman, and the relevant reports and requests have already been issued. I don't want to analyze all risks and problems and challenges which exist in the recovery and the construction sectors, but I would like to underline 3 key aspects which we can solve. Well, first of all, that's the thing related to our digitalization, and for now the state has no other opportunity. We are amidst this digital transition moment together with the European Union, so we shall move towards the following risk: that human resource factor, so the human factor should be as much as possible taken out of the decision making progress. So for it to be more objective, and just recently the Parliament has approved the law 12437, which was very much expected by all territorial communities and all stakeholders, which says that unfortunately there will be delays in terms of the decisions shall be made within this law. So the delays will be different for different regions of Ukraine. And of course, from one perspective, the full-scale invasion became an obstacle to implement all reforms, for all documents to be digitalized and to be uploaded into the urban development cadastral register. But for us, it's also important to maintain this balance for all communities, specifically big urban communities, which have actually this budget for developing of such digital documents. They should do this work because that's one of the processes that could be done. So then it will allow to make this process public, and it will allow to have transparent processes. And another important story, in the Parliament right now we have the draft law 6383 that's on BIM technologies. It has already passed the first reading stage, and I would like to kindly ask the NACP, because right now you are reviewing the state policy and you are cooperating with the ministry. Unfortunately, we don't have the support from the side of the ministry for this draft law to pass the second stage and to be approved as a whole. So please, if it's possible, can you please put on paper that BIM technologies shall be for sure envisaged in legislation, specifically on the level of the law, specifically when projects are being implemented from the budget funds. Second issue in the digitalization dimension, I'm not going to only criticize the ministry, but also to commend their work. Just recently, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine has approved the regulation which are going to take the changes which are going to take place in the expertise field. That's about different protocols, minutes. That's what has been envisaged in the draft law 5655. That's about next steps that should be taken. And that's huge positive development in terms of overcoming different barriers which are correlated with corruption factors. Just a few words, not about digitalization, but about such thing as responsibility. And in the draft law, we have in the Parliament we have draft law 5876 about increased accountability for all stakeholders, including both administrative and criminal accountability. I sincerely believe that we shall increase this threshold of accountability, because without accountability we will not have qualitative recovery process. I know how it's difficult to be compliant with high standards. But I know that it's important. And the third issue, that's the issue of monopoly. If we're speaking about overcoming the risk factors, there should be no monopoly for the local governments. There should be no monopoly for in the field of different certificates and permits. There should be no monopoly for the executive authorities. And that's why here we are happy to cooperate with all the state authorities to destroy this monopoly. Because let's be frank, any monopoly will lead to corruption. So, dear colleagues, our specialized committee, which under its auspices has also the recovery processes and recovery issues, we will be happy to cooperate with the NACP, with all other state authorities. We kindly ask your help to fast-track legislative changes, legislative initiatives for them to become approved laws, and we will be happy to be engaged in other similar discussions, studies, and expertises, because a huge work shall be still done ahead. Thank you so much, dear Olena. Thank you so much for underlined topics, and I'm happy to give a floor to welcoming words to the Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Environmental Policy and Nature Management, Oleg Bondarenko. Hello, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to say thank you again to our Switzerland friends, the Basel Institute of State Governance, for their deep involvement and capacity building for our state, for their deep involvement into all processes which require correction of and mitigation of corruption risks, which for their deep involvement into building system which will help us to recover in future, and they help us also to make Ukraine better than Ukraine even was before the full-scale invasion. We need to develop constantly. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would like to say thank you for sure to the National Engine on Corruption Prevention for such important initiative. That's not my first time to participate in such important studies, even despite of the fact that it seems like the topics under our committee are quite far from the topic of this study, but the key thing in this study, for me personally and for our committee, is the topic of recovery. Always, on all panels, at all platforms, I and the committee members say that the recovery of our state shall be built on the build back better, build back greener principle. So it means that everything that we do with our country shall lead our country to a better state, to a greener state, and in order to achieve it, we shall be fully aware that all environmental requirements are not just a wish of the Committee on Environmental Policy or members of parliament. No, it's a need of our country, it's a need of next generations, of our lives. We shall give our country to next generations in a better condition. We shall give our country to our next generations as more democratic, more transparent, and greener, as a country to which our citizens would be striving, would be wishing to return back from other countries, and which would be wanted to visit by other foreigners and other people from across the globe, where investments will be also protected. One of the elements of the protection of investments is transparent processes, transparent procedures. Those procedures which will be complying with environmental requirements. So it's about risk assessment, it's about protection of environment. It's not only about assessment of damages to the environment, but it's also about prevention of risks in term and one of these elements is to carry out quality expertise. Speaking about environmental policies and nature assessment, we usually say investors that one of the elements of impact on the environment, which it should be an assessment, which should be always go before the recovery and restoration of different objects. And usually such assessments contain all information needed for investors and banks to make decisions whether to give credits or not.
And this is one of the stimuli to continue to go on working in that direction, to recover activities in this direction, to cut costs of those procedures. And we will insist on that post-war these procedures took place without any exceptions or derogations. So that's going to be important assistance to overcome corruption risks. And there is another thing that I would like to highlight. The recovery procedures, as Olena has mentioned, need to happen in line with the legislation that hopefully will be adopted soon. And that's going to be the laws on recovery, on green recovery. The Ministry of Environment with the Ministry for Development of Communities is also engaged into developing these draft laws. At the same time, we need to get rid of such a phenomenon, I believe, and the committee believes, that we need to get rid of the so-called experimental projects. Let me explain what that is. It happened so that on the 22nd of March 2018, Verkhovna Rada, when hearing the draft law on revising the mandates authorities in the field of environment, and by the way, that was a unique case for the 9th convocation of the parliament, that was just oral presentation, and this draft law had nothing to do with expanded mandate of the government or other bodies, so just orally they made an amendment in transitional provisions of the law on decision-making for issues that require legal regulations, for the exception of cases covered by Article 92 of the Constitution in the areas that are governed by the cabinet in the respective sectors, and well, the procedures are set by the cabinet. So what, let me explain. This is about regulation of certain categories of issues. There are issues that require legal regulation, and we work on that, and NACP work on that, all public authorities do that. So instead of implementing this legal regulation, a number of experimental projects were launched. The committee sent the request to all public authorities regarding implementation of those projects. As a result of this study that we are going to also hear and present to the committee, several central authorities went far beyond the legal regulation. Some public authorities relaunched the same projects beyond the 2-year period, and unfortunately they didn't come up with any legislative initiative to finally settle these issues. This is one of the greatest corruption risks that we see in this area. This is not due governance, so this is something that we need to correct altogether. We are heading to Europe, and we must comply with the European legislation, and in the legislative framework that's going to be harmonized with EU acquis, we need to include transparent and understandable principles for public activities, and that must include reconstruction and recovery of civilian facilities after the war. That's our objective. We are ready to join into these activities. We are ready to consider recommendations of NACP at our committee. We are ready to contribute to adoption and discussion of the laws. That's very important for us. And I hope that this study will also give grounds to develop new draft laws or to make amendments in the current ones. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the issues, for highlighting sustainable development in the process of recovery and the focus on experimental projects, and this is covered in the study. I believe during the presentation we'll focus on that separately. I pass the floor to the next participant, Juhani Grossmann, and Senior Advisor of Basel Institute of Governance, Central and Eastern Europe. And colleagues, you have your headsets, so if you need simultaneous interpretation from English into Ukrainian, you can use those.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, it's a pleasure to be with you today and discuss this crucial topic, restoring Ukraine's infrastructure and services efficiently and transparently, making the best use of limited funds. Thank you very much to NACP for hosting us and the co-authors in this report for the productive process. Allow me to start by acknowledging the exceptionally challenging circumstances you operate under, and my appreciation for your continued bravery in light of seemingly impossible obstacles. As members of the European family, your sacrifices made at the front are the investment in our collective European security. You're protecting the family, which we have to treat with respect, and it is my ardent hope that we will be able to honor these sacrifices by jointly building a Ukrainian future that makes today's deprivations worthwhile. Family members support each other, and so we at the Basel Institute seek to provide this support. A top priority for us is to provide the tools needed in face of unprecedented challenges. Those of us not in the military space support to the extent of our own capacity. For us at the Basel Institute, that means supporting your efforts to combat corruption, an enemy you have been fighting for decades, and that continues to have the potential to threaten your ability to mount the effective defense and restoration of your country today. Corruption is such a complicated topic. Most of us just want to wish it away, like a bad dream. But unfortunately, it continues to be a reality. That does not mean it's stagnant. Like any enemy, it adapts, mutates, strengthens or weakens, depending on how we treat it. Ukraine's relentless fight against corruption over the last decade has meant that you, in turn, have been able to hone your anti-corruption weapons. This is somewhat similar conceptually to your relentless and impressive military innovations. You have step by step built your anti-corruption arsenal to a degree where Ukraine's anti-corruption infrastructure, consisting of specialized agencies, decentralized corruption prevention officers, robust civil society and independent media, has become more and more sophisticated until it meets some of the highest global standards and often even exceeds that of Western counterparts. There is, in fact, a dedicated international standard about the independence of anti-corruption agencies called the Jakarta Principles, which highlights the importance of ensuring independence in the appointment of the leadership, protecting employees from malicious civil and criminal proceedings, continuity in their work, and budgetary autonomy. I don't give this praise lightly. When I travel around the world to the countries I work with and tell them about the fact that you continue to robustly pursue corruption during a full-scale war, my colleagues tell me they wish they had your anti-corruption infrastructure. We understand that this infrastructure is not something that was achieved easily. Rather, that you had to fight for every law to remain intact, strengthen every regulation repeatedly to address residual risk, build and protect every case against obstacles, shepherd every risk assessment to the mitigation stage, and then negotiate, argue, cajole, and convince opponents to have these mitigation measures implemented. I know how carefully you considered the recruitment of every detective, analyst, prosecutor, and judge. And the resulting system has been impressive, a national treasure. You should be proud of it, as should all Ukrainian citizens and leaders alike. We have certainly been privileged to be associated with it. The value of this anti-corruption infrastructure to Ukraine is not only sentimental, however. It is also of crucial importance as a countermeasure to those who say, often without any personal experience or understanding of the issue, that any money or resources sent to Ukraine will only fuel corruption, including in the restoration process. This is also a crucial countermessage to Russian propaganda, which loves to portray Ukraine as hopelessly corrupt. You, the anti-corruption partners, helped us build these arguments against such skeptics. And the arguments are as follows. How can Ukraine be hopelessly corrupt, we argue, if it has managed to decrease corruption perception by 5 points between 2019 and this year, showing one of the best results in the region? How can Ukraine be hopeless if it manages to investigate, arrest, and convict high-level corrupt officials? How can Ukraine be hopeless if the maturity of its anti-corruption institutions, as recently assessed by the OECD, as Viktor also mentioned, surpasses many of those in OECD member countries? How can Ukraine be hopeless if it has one of the most transparent public procurement systems in the world? How can it be hopeless if its public service digitalization has drastically decreased opportunities for petty corruption and rent-seeking? And finally, how can Ukraine's restoration be hopeless if it has as sophisticated a corruption risk analysis as the one we are presenting today? These are real-life arguments that result in real-life financial, political, and military support because they confirm your responsible stewardship of the support you receive. They have allowed us to say that Ukraine is not a corrupt country. It is a country that fights corruption. To those of you in the anti-corruption community, thank you for your hard work over the last 12 years to build and sustain these anti-corruption infrastructure. We understand that the current situation represents a changed landscape, but fighting corruption remains as important as ever. Your work is inspiring to us, and we will continue to support Ukraine's anti-corruption aspirations to safeguard this essential dimension of your national defense and restoration. Thank you.
Дякую, пані, за таку
Thank you for this very inspiring address. Thank you for your leadership and your assistance for anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine, and important highlights for today's discussion. Now I'm happy to pass the floor for a welcome address to the next speaker, Alla Basalaieva, head of the State Audit Service of Ukraine. Dear participants of today's event, dear colleagues, the topic is very important and very sensitive, because when we speak about corruption risks in the field of recovery, restoration, we speak about significant amounts of funds of Ukrainian taxpayers and of international partners. And the objective of audit activities of the State Audit Service is to find answers to the questions how and how efficiently public finance is used. Unfortunately, sometimes we do detect some losses, sometimes significant losses. And these are losses for the state budget of Ukraine. That is why at the end of 2022, State Audit Service signed an agreement of collaboration with NACP. And the objective of this cooperation is to provide for efficient, transparent, and integral public finance management and efficient use of funds of the state budget of Ukraine. Our collaboration is also, we have close collaboration with law enforcement agencies. Our specialists are involved in investigation of criminal cases, and upon the request of law enforcement agencies, we estimate the losses for the state budget, but that's not our main goal. We try to preempt these violations. We try to make sure that we use public funds efficiently. You should agree that when the losses are incurred, it's difficult to recover, to compensate for that. So when we conduct our control audit activities, we've now completed the audit of the sectoral ministry, and our experts have analyzed the list of corruption risks in the course of recovery, rebuilding, in particular civilian facilities. We shared our findings with NACP in particular, and we aspire to fruitful cooperation with MPs to make amendments, respective amendments, so that in the future we could prevent the violations that are going to be covered today during presentation of the study. Above all, we notice, well, let me mention several examples. We believe that it is wrong when, in the course of implementation of a project, without any grounds, the contractors initiate amending the contracts. For example, the type of price from dynamic to fixed ones, because they discovered that they can procure at much lower price, so let's fix that in the contract. And it's wrong when we change the price, the value of the contract in the course of the work. There is no efficient mechanism to ensure liability of customers and designers for inefficient project designs. It is necessary to digitalize the procedures related to digitalization of at all the stages. No microphone. And we believe that there is a pressing need to establish a single electronic database system of data on market prices for construction materials online in real time, because this is about the war, high demand. And we were engaged as experts in criminal proceedings during construction of fortifications. We participated in control activities where the sarcophaguses were built for power plants, and we understand that the demand is growing, the price is growing, and we need to have the opportunity to follow the prices online because it is so relevant. What's also important is the necessity to establish single rules for contracting, in particular according to the design and build approach. We heard the suggestions of the Prime Minister. We will come up with our opinion because we can see some downsides of that approach, and we are ready to share our findings with the specialized ministry and with the government. We would like to highlight the risks that could be faced, and we should avoid those risks. We also discovered that we lack efficient mechanisms to control assigning of the performance acts. The work may be of low quality, incomplete, there may be deficiencies, and those who accept that may avoid liability. It is necessary to publish the full list of documents that make it possible to fully evaluate the construction project and the cost of it before the bidding process starts. And I believe that we need to learn how to save funds, because rational use of funds of our state budget is something that is important for our survival, for our victory. So I call on you to continue this close collaboration. Thank you. Thank you, Alla, for your introductory address, and we will go back to discussing those issues when presenting the findings of the research. And now I'm happy to pass the floor to Serhii Derkach, Deputy Minister for Development of Communities and Territories. Hello, colleagues. Happy to see you all, especially here in NACP. I worked here for 3 years, and it is so nice that today we speak about assessing strategic risks and analysis of risks and further decision making. Because I absolutely agree with Viktor and with his statement that fighting corruption starts by analyzing, assessing risks and developing the state public policy, and then it functions as an efficient mechanism to prevent corruption and not to deal with like hundreds of criminal investigations. Regarding recovery process, let me mention that during the war, in the situation of the war, this is unprecedented. We have huge losses because of the Russian aggression. The World Bank calculated that it is about 500 billion losses. That's huge. And of course, we understand that we will need to recover a lot of aspects. OECD in their reports indicate that the greatest corruption risks are associated with infrastructure projects, with construction projects, and that impacts the situation that we have in Ukraine.
Just recently in the Rome conference, our ministry has concluded 5 contracts at the amount of 350,000 million US dollars. So it means that there will be huge funds allocated for recovery and construction of Ukraine. Of course, in our next panel discussion, we will discuss it in details. We are going to discuss the need for the law, the digitalization processes and procedures, but generally, I would like to say that today, for us, for the sake of recovery and construction, it's so important to focus our efforts on transparent and responsible processes, because it will lead to build trust to institutions, trust from the side of the public to the state generally. For the recent days, you can see how it's important to have trust from citizens to institutions and state authorities of Ukraine. So speaking about recovery, it's not only about state-of-the-art technologies that shall be applied also in Ukraine. because we shall not recover using some old standards, but it's also about our attitude, our perception, treatment of all the recovery processes. And here we have this role of risks. That's about mitigation of all problems and challenges. Here is there also a huge role of policy making, and that's a huge role of our ministry and members of parliament to work together, to join our efforts in order to focus our attention as much as possible on the law-making stage where we can mitigate all risks. Here I would like to say thank you to the NACP, to the Basel Institute, to the State Audit Service for their contribution. I remember how several years ago we issued the first analysis of strategical risks related to the land usage corruption. That was the very first analysis issued by the NACP in terms of strategical risks, and it brought its own results. Two draft laws have been approved based on such conclusions of the NACP. So I do really hope that such joint work of all state authorities will bring some results, and we will be able to identify all challenges and means to mitigate them in state policies and anti-corruption programs of state authorities. And later I will tell you more about anti-corruption program of our ministry, how we implement it, what our next plans ahead. But I would like to say that from our side of the ministry, we are fully focused on qualitative work on mitigation of the corruption.
Сильній інституційній спільноті ми зможемо
And also thanks to this work, we will be able to find balance between transparent and accountable system and quick system, because we would like to live in a successful country, in recovered country right now already, not waiting for it for years. That's why it's very important to find a balance here, which is very hard to find in huge infrastructure projects. Thank you so much, Serhii, for such words, for such accents on prevention of corruption risks. So thank you so much to all welcoming partners. So we are going to the presentation of the research, and we kindly invite every one of the colleagues who are going to present this research to the audience. Please take your seats on the scene. Just again to remind you about our agenda. So we are moving towards the presentation of the research, and I'm happy to give a floor for the presentation to Serhii Hupiak, Deputy Head of the NACP. Greetings, dear participants at the premises of the NACP, and I would like to say from the very beginning that yes, indeed, first of all, we would like to focus our attention why this topic is so important. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the damage has been inflicted on infrastructure, housing, social sector, transportation infrastructure, and this damage is so gross and so huge. Of course, we shall underline and highlight that based on assessments carried out by different institutions, including the Committee of Ministers of Ukraine, the World Bank, the damage reaches the level of more than $500 billion, and the direct damage is already $176 billion. Of course, this is a huge damage. This is a huge cost which will be needed to recover Ukraine. We need to recover and rebuild Ukraine both during the war, and we will need to do it in the post-war period. And of course, it all leads to different complications, and it also overlaps with relevant risks. Actually, I would like to underline that this process, this issue is not acute, is not crucial, not only for Ukraine. All of us, we understand that it's obvious high corruption risks are present in those sectors where there are state funds, where there are high financial influxes and investments, and where there is an opportunity to abuse such funds because of different risks. These are natural processes. Of course, taking into consideration all those things, we raised our attention to this topic. We realized that it's so acute for us. We need to carry out risk assessment there in this sector and to develop recommendations, what steps will be made in order to mitigate those risks. Strategical analysis of corruption risks is one of the key topics of the NACP mandate. What we do, we take legislation, we analyze legislation, we analyze level of digitalization in this sector, the level of procedures, the circle of stakeholders involved. We analyze different practices, including law enforcement authorities, pre-trial investigation authorities, and pre-trial investigation practices. We analyze international practices and opinions and conclusions of our international counterparts. So based on all this analysis, we develop corruption risks, and our key goal is not only to identify those risks, but of course to say how to overcome those corruption risks. And actually our final product is recommendations which will be forwarded to all stakeholders involved. And the most important thing is that those recommendations should be implemented to this or that extent. Actually, there are so many different stakeholders. It's so good that at this meeting, at this event, we have representatives of ministries, of different organizations. We have here MPs, representatives of the public. All is so good. All because actually their key task. The key task on implementation of those recommendations will be for all of us. So for the NACP, that's not a first research of this topic. In 2018, the analysis of the corruption risks and the real estate sector, which was damaged by the Russian aggression, was done. In 2024, we have also carried out strategical analysis of corruption risks during implementation of an experimental project on recovery of settlements which were damaged and impacted by the Russian Federation aggression. This research is wider, is a continuation of the topic which was started by the previous analysis. It takes into consideration the previous experience, lessons learned, and what has already been implemented on the level of legislation and digitalization. We need to say that this is, so we do not cover the full the whole topic, because this topic is so wide. There are such elements as compensation for businesses, how they are going to how businesses are going to restore, what funds will be used for it, compensation of different processes. There are also issues how we are going to rebuild and how we're going to recover our environment. Everyone sees how much damage has been inflicted on our forests, on our lands, on all of these are also issues of recovery. So this topic is so crucial, extremely important for us, for Ukraine, and it's so wide. Because again, I would like to reiterate, because the issue is about influxes of investments, it's about trust, it's about workplaces, it's about European integration, it's about our reputation, all of us, and accountability to those, including our defenders, who defend our country, doing their best. That's why we need to focus our attention on this topic each time and contribute all our efforts to cover this topic. So what were our conclusions? There were so many of them, and I'm going to give you some examples, but actually our work was not done by only us, so we were not alone on this path. We are not only together with the Basel Institute of Governance and State Audit Service of Ukraine, with whom we cooperated very actively, but actually so many different people, including those present today, have been involved into the process. So law enforcement agencies have been involved and they respond to our inquiries. NABU has provided their practices in their proceedings. Other authorities have contributed. State agency has also responded, providing their vision. NGOs have also responded to our request to share their practices. There were so many different offline visits, one-to-one, during our regional visits with state civil military administrations, because they also raise so many different serious issues and challenges. We have different practices, numerous approaches, different attitudes of the public. But everyone has would like to have transparency in the process and would like to have a fast-tracked recovery process. Very often I need to mention that usually we face resistance when we analyze different corruption risks in different sectors, but in this sector we can see that everyone is so interested in putting everything in order in this sector and to minimize and mitigate corruption risks. So in a nutshell, what are the problems? Problems with legislation, drawbacks on legislation. There is no framework legislation, no single unified rules, rules of a game, so to say. So we need to have also the relevant level of digitalization of procedures. Everyone agrees with the following, and we can bring other examples of other sectors, the Ministry of Health care of Ukraine, so and other things. So everyone agrees that if anything goes untransparently under the closed doors, there is always option, there is always room to hide something. The third issue, the lack of effective oversight over the construction process, the moratorium, the ban which has been enforced in 2020, we can see that we have no effective state oversight over the processes. So we have identified 10 corruption risks, which can be also grouped into 3 groups. So first group, it's possible abuses during the selection process, objects for reconstruction, possible abuses at the stage of project documentation development and procurement, and possible abuses at the stage of contract execution and control execution. So of course our partners and our colleagues will present it to you in detail. We'll tell you about examples, we'll give you specific recommendations regarding the steps that shall be taken. So please be involved as much as possible. Again, I would like to reiterate that this is our joint responsibility in order to mitigate corruption risks. I think in the most important sector for our state. Dear Serhii, thank you so much for giving a short description of key risks, and let's go to presentation of each specific risk in detail. And I'm happy to give a floor to Alla Chernysh, Chief Specialist of the Recovery Policy Implementation Department of the NACP's Department for Implementation of Anti-Corruption Policy in the Recovery and Social and Humanitarian Sphere. Hi to everyone. As Serhii has told you, in 2023-2024, the NACP has already covered this sphere during possible corruption abuses during selection of objects that shall be recovered because of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And there were already some funds allocated for those objects which were damaged because of the Russian aggression. So now funds go to those objects which were damaged during the previous years. So the legislative changes that were made led to following consequences. Discretional decision making during the selection of objects which were damaged and required some recovery. Such decision-making was done without clear defined criteria and prioritization. Inclusion of the construction of objects construction of which has already started before the full-scale invasion, but some funds were allocated for them. Also, we have another corruption risk related to the experimental projects, and there we have the same challenges because there is no unified approach to experimental projects. Implementation of those projects is not very much effective. Experimental projects are temporal by their nature, and the period of the implementation is only 2 years, and it means that after the expiration period of those experimentation projects, new documents, new acts shall be approved. It means that they just copy-paste the previous approaches without taking into consideration all nuances and challenges. The next risk is related to the absence of the legislatively defined and envisaged procedure on pricing for the construction materials. So, according to the build code, the contracting authorities shall analyze pricing for the key construction materials. Such monitoring allows to identify costs for all construction works. There could be also available discretional powers of contracting authorities, which could lead to abuse of the office of the official powers, such as lobbying of third person, interest of third persons, artificial inflation of the price of construction materials, and also one more challenge which complicates the situation, that's absence of relevant legislation required for it. So thank you, Anna. Regarding the next risks, I would like to focus on the following risks, as such as inefficient control over the project documentation. As all of us, we know the project documentation is a very important thing. It's a foundation for the implementation of the whole project. And if the project documentation is not qualitative, it will also lead to problems with implementation of the project. And upon analysis of this topic, we have identified that the project documentation actually is very correlated with the quality of the implementation of the project, and it could lead to the monopoly with the supply of the services and goods. So it's abuse of funds and powers. All could lead to exceeding usage of funds and lack of quality in construction. One of the sources of risk that's inadequate capacity of contracting authorities in terms of control and oversight of the project documentation preparation stage, and also low capacity in terms of implementation of BIM technologies. Legislation which envisages mechanism to control the quality of project documentation is not perfect. It has some gaps and it leads to risks. Another problem is related to supporting services. As we know, supporting services are divided into 3 categories: technical oversight, academic and technical support, and services of an engineer in the field. And it means that all services provided in the supporting services field are also vulnerable and susceptible to corruption. And it means that, for example, salary for technical oversight engineer is correlated with signing of the formal acts, and it means that sometimes oversight and control could be performed just formally on paper and without the quality which is needed.
The compensation for this work is based on the universal formula and may not take into account other aspects, so the same calculation approach applies to large-scale projects and to small-scale construction. Also, in the current legislation, there are no clear standards of control mechanisms to document and check the quality of related services provided. Also, another risk in this group is unclear procedures to apply direct procurement or the bidding procurement without the competitive procedure. In the period of the martial law, The legislation in the field of procurement was simplified, which is due to obvious factors that procurement needs to happen fast in order to respond to pressing challenges. At the same time, lack of clear regulation that would indicate the clear reasons for grounds for conducting the procurement without the competition results in that direct contracts may apply where there is no competition, and that results in significant corruption risks, because traditionally the field of public procurement remains one of the most vulnerable ones for corruption. At the same time, this is also one of the key areas key tools for recovery. Thank you. And to go on with that, with the procurement, let's proceed with qualification requirements. Sometimes qualification requirements make it so that there is they target specific companies, or where they add qualifications that are not always required in those projects, or equipment that is not on balance sheet and that is not going to be used. Some qualification criteria which are, so to say, kind of targeted, and that's a certain standard that is not going to be used, or what we can see based on infrastructural facilities, where on page 100 there is the address, and when the contractor enters, we see that no employee of the contractor works with those documents. So why this qualification criteria? Let's move on. Next one. Efficient control over the key requirements, and this is, we mentioned that's about this dynamic of fixed price. As mentioned, we started the procurement with dynamic price, then the bidding procedure is announced, we have we signed the contract, and then we changed the fixed price for dynamic price, which then makes it possible to manipulate the cost of the contract, because prices change, and in this way the price on construction, inert materials and metal increase, and if it is protracted in time, after 3 years the project may turn 2 or 3 times more expensive. As a result, the failure to manage the total cost makes the project more expensive, and then not always we have the opportunity to complete this project in a timely manner, or even to complete it at all. Then the timelines. When I was coming here at 8:40, a citizen called me from Kiev region. This is Mr. Prokopenko from Blistavice village. 2 months ago, he wrote a complaint to us, emphasizing that for 3 years they've been restoring his building, and in that framework, every quarter they postponed the deadline. And I checked that. I went there to check, and I saw that once a quarter they do some work. So last time they they combined, linked the ventilation with the chimney. We had a complaint about that, and it was corrected, but the work is never completed. As a result, he cannot live in his building, in his house, and each time the customer postpones the deadline without applying any penalties to the contractor. And that's a question why. We had a dialogue with the Minister of Economy, so that the change of substantial terms of contract were sought. The integrated system of estimations is a digital solution that could reduce this risk of the gap between the procurement in Prozora, the payments in Treasury, publication of any information, any other information. So DREAM could be the platform that integrates all of these processes, and we see it transparently, starting from planning, setting priorities and infrastructure and the facilities built, and also estimates and the acts that are uploaded in XML compatible format, where it would be possible to compare the prices. I mean, it would be good to see The risk elimination, where there is a gap between or some controversies between different electronic instruments. So DREAM could be the single ecosystem. And the last risk, which is no longer a risk, this is lack of state architectural and construction supervision. This is basically the only body now that conducts the oversight of construction. So, and this is the audit service. If it is right that specialists in finance do that, well, that's not always sufficient. Not always they have enough capacity to ensure control in all the regions. So let's think about how to control this risk. Maybe for where it is financed, the recovery is financed from the state budget, the moratorium should be suspended. Okay, and we go to the next speaker, Olena Kryvoshey, the head of the Department for Implementation of Anti-Corruption Policy in the field of recovery and social and humanitarian area. We have briefly covered the risks, but each of you on the back of your page can follow the QR code, find the QR code and check out this study and have access to more detailed information. I would like to proceed with our recommendations regarding amendments to legislative acts or drafting new ones. It's nice that we have heard that the same recommendations have been mentioned by the specialized committee and representatives of the audit service, so we're moving in the right direction. First recommendation is develop the draft law that will define legal and organizational requirements for the process of reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine following the extensive damage caused by the armed aggression, to set clear and transparent criteria for selection and prioritization of projects, measures for monitoring and controlling reconstruction, mandatory digitalization of procedures, unified rules for contracting, unified requirements for payment processing, and standardized rules for documentation and financing of all expenses related to reconstruction. Next, develop and approve legal acts that should include provisions for implementing standardized approach for the role of technical supervision engineer, including detailed list of responsibilities and mechanism for calculating payment for each function. Also, we suggest submitting to the cabinet the draft law that requires mandatory price monitoring and establishing an unified electronic data system in real time, providing real-time data, and a unified system to submit construction primary work completion certificates. Then develop and submit the procedures for analyzing current prices and to conduct the respective training for the authorized representatives. We believe that's important. That will make an important contribution to mitigate the risks. Next recommendation, this is develop and submit to the cabinet the draft acts for specific aspects of state procurement. So it used to be suggested for procurement in the situation of the martial law, and we conducted the respective analysis. So this is about resolution 1178. After that analysis, more than 20 amendments were made in that resolution, I guess, but frankly speaking, it is not efficient and it includes a lot of risks. So we believe that it needs to be cancelled, withdrawn, or it needs to be amended to ensure concrete grounds for simplified procurement procedures or amending the contracts, mandatory publication of the full set of documents that allow comprehensive assessment of construction project even before tenders. Maybe then something will be changed. Then we also recommend to adopt an act that will implement an automated system for tracking payments for completed construction works. Regarding the Treasury, to conduct, to introduce the electronic format for assessment of the costs of work. And the last recommendation, this is not all the recommendations, but the main ones, we suggest amending Resolution 303 and to renew implementation of planned and out-of-plan state supervision activities, and to authorize unscheduled state inspections in architecture and construction. So I invite all the stakeholders, our partners, to take into account these recommendations, because we plan to take them into account when drafting the state anti-corruption project and the respective program and the respective strategy. NACP is always ready to help. We are always open, so if you need our support when developing these amendments to regulations and adoption of new ones, we will be happy to join in. Thank you, Olena, for presenting these recommendations that have been developed as a result of the report. And now I'm happy to pass the floor to Deputy Head of Kharkiv Regional Administration, Yevhen Ivanov. He will share the challenges encountered at the regional level when implementing the recovery projects. Hello, and unfortunately right now, while we are speaking here, another 3 guided bombs have attacked Kharkiv. We are now trying to clear out the situation. So Kharkiv region, the city of Kharkiv, have been most affected during the war, and we have incredible figures, more than 70,000 facilities destroyed, and mostly these are residential buildings. Otherwise, there's hundreds of schools, hospitals, civilian infrastructure, administrative buildings, businesses are suffering. And also, before the war, in the city there were 2 million residents, and now it is a city where we have about 1 million, but 1 or 2 million, but we have 600,000 IDPs from Donetsk, Luhansk regions, from the part of Kharkiv region where there are active hostilities. So we need to keep building for those people to create jobs. We need to protect our critical infrastructure, to bring education and healthcare services underground. Unfortunately, there is no way out. So a lot of underground schools are being built. There are ambitious projects for hospitals that have been implemented. One of them is a unique project, and that's a regional underground hospital that by its size and potential capacity would be comparable with an ordinary regional on-the-ground hospital. All of these projects are being implemented, maybe not as fast as we would wish them to, but we are grateful to the government, to Presidential Office, to the Minister of Infrastructure, to all other stakeholders who are supporting us, who communicate with the region and support the projects, understanding the challenges that Kharkiv now faces. And this is in the situation where we have little time for adaptation, for recovery, for fast response, because we need to keep people in the city, preferably families with children, which requires due and decent work and studies conditions. So speaking about recovery, about the topic of our event today, let me mention that we have the regional program, that was anti-corruption program, that was adopted by the head of the regional administration for the next 2 years. Now we are working to draft the next program here. We are grateful to NACP for communication, cooperation, for that we can really ensure quick contact to improve some aspects, to have discussions. And basically most of the activities that the society sees, that everyone can see, this is about implementation of activities in the framework of transparency and accountability groups. They work in all regions. That was the initiative of the president in 2023. For 2 years now we've been implementing this program, and this mechanism, it is quite efficient even in the situation of limited opportunities. and that is due to some imperfections in the legislative framework. I will not reiterate those aspects that the colleagues have mentioned already. I absolutely agree that all of them are relevant and pressing. Direct contracts, tender documents, that's basically what we frequently see in the region. So why the group is efficient? We believe above all because this is about expertise. Basel Institute is involved. These are independent think tanks, and every project needs to undergo this analysis, expert analysis, especially where there is resonance. And that has proven efficient. We have a chatbot of the head of the regional administration, chatbots for the respective districts in the region, and anyone, any Telegram channel or volunteer or just an activist can come up with a question and we must respond. So we provide written response or we discuss at the group sessions all the concerns that people raise, and this is how we have resolved a lot of issues. 103 projects have been implemented and heard during these group sessions during these 3 years. So many of those projects were either adjusted or postponed, or the costs were revised. So we need to work closely with the citizens, and half of members of the group are volunteers, social activists, also representatives of the construction sector. And there are no miracles, of course, so the core of our success is about detailed analysis of every issue. Members of the group, they go on site to construction sites, they check the course of the work, they take photos, videos, and this is the only way how it's possible to keep the situation under control. Because if we just sit down and have a talk and then we have no reliable information about the project, that's not going to work that way. So we try to keep control. We are grateful to law enforcement agencies who are all engaged and participate in the sessions. We control the contractors, construction companies. Sometimes we see very weird situations because often subcontractor wins a tender and you see that this is just two women working with a ladder or whatever and a drill, and they are ambitious. They say that they're ready to recover a school for 100 million hryvnias. I mean, we need to analyze all the information, all the detailed information, where there is public resonance, where it works this way, and then the results of our analysis are publicly presented, and then it works efficiently. And of course, the past towards improvement of legislation and those aspects that have been discussed today, whether it's going, well, we see that the more elaborated the legislation, the easier for us it will be to implement anti-corruption policy in the regions. And that's it on my side. Thank you, Yevhen, for sharing the challenges that the recovery process faces in the field, especially in the regions that are close to the areas of hostilities. I'm grateful to all participants of this panel discussion for presentation of key findings and recommendations based on the report, and we can proceed with the next panel discussion, minimization of corruption risks in the formation of public policy and control of reconstruction. And I invite the next speakers to join in.